Okay, hi everyone. So it's SmithyQ from SmithyQ.com, and today we're going to look at a Blitz game. It's not one of my games. This is a game between Caro B and JMC1 at Lichess. They're both over 2,500, and we're in for a treat because this is just a really fun, exciting attacking game. It's got a pretty final combination. You know, chess should be beautiful. This game certainly is that. So what I'm going to do, I'm going to very quickly just go over the game, 2-3 minutes, just so we can see the flow of what happens. And we can appreciate, again, the beauty of the combination. And then I'm going to back up a little bit, and we're going to try and deconstruct the attack. We're going to see what made the attack so strong. Why was black swept away so fast? And what can we learn about this from our own games? Let's just jump right in. And so, again, I'm going to go over this fairly quickly at the beginning. We reach a position. So far, both sides are developing, pretty standard. We have an exchange, and black decides to take with the knight. This has the advantage of keeping this diagonal open for his bishop, which is great, but there's no center pawn, and so white will likely play e4 with tempo at some point. So there's pros and cons. Anyway, bishop to d2, both sides develop, queen goes to c2. So clearing the way for queenside castling, this is the first indication that white is definitely ready for an attack. Knight d7, there it is, e4, exchange, exchange, castle, castle. So here we go, as advertised. This is a classic attacking position because both sides have castle on opposite sides. So we're going to be throwing pawns. We can easily imagine h4, h5, maybe with the knight, the queen, the bishop, this bishop coming in here. Lots of things aimed directly at the black king. But at the same time, that's not the whole story. The white queenside, it's already open. We can imagine c5 blowing things open, the rook sliding over, maybe even a4, a5, b4, b5. That's possible. The queen, the rooks are going to slide over. Maybe there's sacrifices over here. Let's see what happens. Who's faster? Now, it's worth noting that with white's last move, when he castled, he brought the rook onto the d-file. And so now, if black were to play c5 and the d-file opens up, well, that might make the queen uncomfortable. So that's why he starts, moving the queen over, queen to c8, h4, c5, both sides going at it, d5, take, take. And so now the center is opened up as well, and we can see, it's not clear, who does that favor? Opening up the center. It seems that it likely favors white, just because bishop can now come, both bishops are able to slide right on over. At the same time, maybe the d-file will be useful for black, but certainly white has the rook there first. Black plays queen to c7, preparing to get another rook over to the c-file. Maybe he's got a check. That's why white moves the king. Bishop f6. Trying to neutralize this bishop. But now white throws the attack into high gear. Knight g5, look at this. Threatening mate. And there's no point in taking it, because that'll just open the h-file. So you've got g6. How does white continue the attack? Boom. h5. It's actually sacrificing a full piece, because there's nothing protecting the knight. Black just takes it. But now, let's take a look. Take. Take. Then here comes d6. Queen moves away. Bishop to c4. Ooh, look at these bishops. Just slicing right through. In fact, the black king has nowhere to go. The only move that makes any sense? Rook to f7. Sacrificing exchange. But white doesn't take it. No. White, beautiful final move. Queen takes g6. It's check. And after take, we slide on in, and we got this beautiful final corner made. Isn't that great? Just fantastic. White's attack, things are pretty even, but then all of a sudden it's as if white just kicked right into high gear. So let's look at this. Let's look at this game and try and figure out how this attack came about. Well, we just saw it, right? But let's back up. Or more accurately, let's do some reverse engineering. Let's see what black could have done better. So we back up. So let's take a look. So again, white's last move is queen takes g6, and that's going to be mate in 1 next move. All right, so there's not much we can do. And same thing. After bishop to c4, black doesn't have any moves besides this, and then we already know that queen takes g6 is mate. So let's back up again. So we can see here that white plays this d6, and now we can see the real point of d6. Not only is it hitting the queen, it's also now opening up this bishop, right? Because right here, the bishop can go here, d-pawn's in the way, so we play d6, now the bishop comes forward. And d6 comes with tempo. It's hitting the queen. There's no good spot to put the queen anywhere. I mean, what are we going to do? Play queen to c6, that way we can block the queen? No, that doesn't make any sense. Black is still lost. So that tells us that as soon as white plays d6 here, he's winning. It's going to be mate, he wins the queen, something. So if we're going to find an improvement for black, it's got to be basically here. This doesn't look very good, because we can see that white's last move was taking the g6 pawn. And we saw that f takes g6 is opening up this diagonal. So is there a good move besides f takes g6? Okay, well, h takes g6 is pretty terrible. We don't want to do that. But if we don't take, what on earth are we going to do? There's actually, it's important to note, there's actually a really, let's just make a random move for black. Let's say knight e5. The real threat here isn't even to take either of these. We could actually just push forward. And this is hilarious. So we're actually threatening queen takes h7 because the queen and the rook are there, and of course the pawn's attacking the rook. And so after something like this, take, here the computer says it's mate in 11, and the attack is too strong. And even if we don't imagine that, we can just tell from this position that this can't possibly be very good for black. So let's back up. So black's last move was accepting the piece sacrifice, which, as we know, after h takes g6, leads to a completely lost game. Okay, and maybe that kind of makes sense, right? So let's not accept the sacrifice. But what do? We now know what white's threats are. Again, he wants to open the h file and have some really nasty business down here. But what do? So we got a free tempo. But what on earth do we do here? One possibility is we could simply take the bishop, right? Get rid of that line. But at the same time, we could already, I think, intuitively see that this is a very uncomfortable position, just because, again, we have all these weaknesses on the dark squares. And sure, we're trading off white's good bishop, but we're also getting rid of our best defensive piece. And in fact, if you were to look at the king side right now, there's nothing there. There's pawns, there's no pieces. And again, white has this. He's got the knight. We can imagine the queen. Even this pawn, you could imagine coming here, trying to threaten mate onto g7. White has a huge amount of attackers. And this is precisely why the defense is so difficult. I believe it was Ivan Sokolov. There's a video series that he did in which he talked extensively about basically a theory of attack. And it basically goes, you need to have more attackers than defenders. Now, that sounds pretty obvious, but then there's kind of this magic number where if you just have one more attacker than defender, then that's generally good, potentially even very good, depending on the concrete variations. If you get 2 or more, you're nearly winning. And if it's 3, then you're almost always winning. And we can kind of see that playing out right here. Except there are just so many attackers, it's so difficult for black to defend. And he doesn't really defend. Spoiler alert. In this position, white doesn't even need to recapture right away. Is that there are so many attacks. There are so many tactics in this position. And by taking, again, we can see how the pawn is now acting as an attacker as well. We've got the knight, we've got the pawn. These light squares are just being completely eviscerated, unfortunately. And we can imagine if black tries to save his piece, let's say he comes back with bishop to g7, well, that allows us to take with the pawn, and now again we've got queen takes f7 coming in. And so for example, rook takes, queen takes, comes on over. Now you could just win the rook, but even better is to come here with a royal fork. And so this tells us that black, he can't, save his bishop. So we'll imagine that he'll recapture somehow. Ooh, we push the queen back with d6. Then we win the bishop. We're going to come on down in here. So of course he can't take. Maybe black instead is going to play with queen to f6, where he defends. He's trying to exchange queens, of course. No. We're going to slide on over. And the attack here basically plays itself. We're going to play rook h4, bishop c4, other rook slides over, and there's going to be disaster somewhere on the h-file. The attack is simply too strong. And again, we can see that. This is opposite side castling. And black's attack is nowhere. Like, there's no threats over here against the white king, and everything is coming down with the black king. This is just terrible for black. And so we were looking at this position, and one of the problems with where we thought maybe we could just exchange is that by exchanging, we're getting rid of the only defender near the black king. And there are just too many attackers. I was thinking maybe we could just bring the bishop right back. So taking the sacrifice doesn't work, exchanging doesn't work. Maybe we can bring it here, with the idea that if there's ever an exchange, then the king is here, maybe we can slide the rook over. Maybe this is a way to defend. Well, it doesn't. And it's going to be the exact same set of tactics that we're going to see again and again. So we're going to see take. Let's actually just exchange. Boom. Here we come again. d6, forcing the queen away. And then after the queen moves, rook to h7. We can just stop it there. This is a complete disaster once more for black. And so this is really a long way of me saying that after this g6, h5, black is losing. He's not getting mated, that's great, but again, the computer is still saying evaluation anywhere from 4 to 6 for white. So white's up a rook in this position. Not very good. So let's back up. So white played knight g5, g6, h5. But as we know, as we just saw, this whole variation is losing for black. Whether he exchanges, whether he takes the sacrifice, whether he moves it back, any move, actually. I can't go through every single move, but every move, white still has a decisive advantage. Which means, after knight g5, is there anything better? Well, we're threatening mate on h7. H6 doesn't work. G6 we know doesn't work, and so the only other move that might work would be taking. Oh, but this can't possibly work. Look, we've got, again, we're still threatening mate, and then after, G6, we have to do it now. This is pretty much the exact same variation. We throw in D6, queen moves, we're going to play bishop C4, and then just for fun, let's say black takes this. White has this. And so again, we're threatening mate. We're going to throw this other, again, if he takes. That's not very good. And the attack, again, is just playing itself. And so in this position, black played bishop to f6. And it makes intuitive sense why, is that he's worried about this bishop, he wants to exchange it. But as we see, after knight to g5, threatening mate, again, g6, h5, we've seen this, that black just gets swept away. He's already losing. Which means in this position, we need to find a better move than bishop f6. What stands out? What can we do? Because we now know quite precisely what white's ideas are. It's really simple, actually. Knight g5, mate on h2. or h7, open the h file. That's it. What do we do? What I was thinking in this position is that maybe, again, we're running out of defenders, so maybe we can play knight f6. Because now we have a knight and a bishop over in the defense. Maybe this helps. It doesn't help that much, in all honesty. Is that after knight to g5, we are now threatening to take the knight, and then after, so just imagine we do a nothing move, take, and that's mate. So even with the knight on f6, we're still threatening the very simple mate. And if he plays, so if he were then to play g6 to stop that, oh, we can see those weak squares coming in again. And in fact, there's actually something really simple. We can just play d6. It's forking, right? And then after take, we take over here, and oh, this is clearly a disaster. We got the exact same plan. We got everything coming in, and now he doesn't even. There's still no defenders on the king side. So the short answer is that knight f6 doesn't work. What else? In fact, the computer actually thinks the best move is rook to f8, and I'm not going to lie, this is actually because in all these variations where white starts cashing in, this is going to start giving the king an escape square. And the king's going to start running over here. And so if that is your best strategy, something has gone wrong. And I think here we can start seeing precisely where some of the mistakes are. But first off, does this position look lost to you? Does it look won? What does it look like? Well, as we know, is that after queen c7, king b1, bishop f6, well, we now know after knight g5, it is winning for white. So this position is deceptively simple. Let's start from right here. But black is on the verge of defeat. What did black play in this position? Black played queen to c7. And this looks right, because it's moving the queen, it's bringing a square over the rook, it's threatening a check. It makes a lot of sense. And yet, after king b1, we had that bishop f6. We've seen this. And then also, how many times and how many variations was d6 coming in with tempo against the queen, pushing the queen back, and allowing so many tactics to happen. Over and over again. So the queen is just not on a very good square right here. Somewhat ironically, being able to play bishop f6 is somewhat, I don't want to say it's okay here, just because if we imagine the exact same things were happening with knight g5, g6, we can't play h5 just because it's check. Whoops. And then the bishop can come back, and that's okay. So this would mean that white would have to play king to b1 first, and then black needs to find a good move here. And the short answer is, again, there isn't a good move here. Black is very likely lost. Again, white's attack is just too fast, and again, black's attack is nowhere close. So let's go right here, back with d5. So the question is, do you take or do you not take? Now, well, we know in the game there was take, and then queen c7, and then king b1, bishop, and we've seen the rest. So that means taking isn't a good idea. And we can kind of see why as well, because right now this pawn's in the way, and so it's stopping the attack on h7. After the exchange, take, now there's just a free diagonal all the way there. Also, it kind of makes sense is that the white rook is behind this pawn, and the more open files, the more powerful that rook is going to get. Black has nothing on the e file, nothing on the d file, and so exchanging doesn't make a lot of sense. That said, there's only one move in this position that doesn't make black much worse. And that move, somewhat, think about it if you want. Maybe you could pause it. Now again, this is according to the computer. All my analysis, it's backed up with the computer, and there's a good chance that white simply has a very good position regardless. The idea would be to play c4. What's it doing? Well, it's kind of preventing the situation from opening. It is looking at these two squares. It's kind of keeping this bishop out of the game. It looks a little bit ugly, because we can think of, right, take, and then there's actually a little tactic here. He can just take it anyway, because if we recapture, whoops, so white's won a pawn, he's attacking both undefended bishops, that's not very good. So this would mean, after taking the pawn, we need to play something like knight to c5. So now the knight's protecting this, the queen's protecting this, the knight is looking at a couple of squares, the bishops, and we can see that there's a couple of more pieces near the white king. Maybe the c-file is completely open up. Again, we can imagine, if you imagine I could actually draw the arrows correctly, the rook's coming over here, and maybe white will actually have to deal with a threat. Because, again, the entire game, and not one variation. Actually, that's not completely true. There was one check on g5, where the king needed to move out of the way. But other than that, the white king has been perfectly safe. Here, there's at least hints that that's not the case. Maybe. But white is still doing extremely well. And so, what's funny is that the computer actually thinks that c5, which to me is the most logical, the most obvious move. It's probably, I'd only have about 2 candidate moves in this position, and c5 is probably both of them. This move, if it's not, it might be an exaggeration to call it losing, it certainly puts black very much in the back foot. Because again, after d5, even if black doesn't take, again, white is just doing well in all these variations. That last variation, black was doing better, but that's because in every other variation, he was just completely losing, right? So it's a very low bar he had to clear. Playing c5 was just incorrect just because it was able to open this position up, or it gives white the option of opening up, and he's better suited to do that. The computer actually thinks that c6 is the best move. And then there's ideas of playing a5 afterwards, maybe b, and it's a much slower, uglier, unhappy way of playing. It's blocking in this bishop. Yeah, there's ideas of maybe playing bishop to a6, exchanging this bishop, which is, again, not intuitively the thing that you want to do. Intuitively, playing c5 makes a lot of sense. The problem is white's attack is so incredibly strong. And what you would need to do is you need to be able to look at this position, calculate those variations, see the attack was strong, and then basically decide not to do that. And that's tough. And so let's look at this position and figure out what makes it so good for white. Because again, this is, being forewarned is forearmed. We want to be able to recognize in advance the threats against our king, so that way we don't get stuck in a hopeless position where it seems like no matter what we're doing, we're just losing. Like with black here, this is move 12. And after c5, again, it's an exaggeration to say he's lost, but he's doing extremely poorly. And after take, queen to c7, he definitely is lost, even though it's not game over for 8 more moves. We don't want to do that. So what makes this position so strong? And really, it's kind of a factor of 2 things. Well, it's a whole bunch of things. Let's go over them. For one, again, it's attackers versus defenders. How many attackers are there? So the bishop is one potential attacker, so that's 1. Queen, aiming at the king side, that's 2. Knight easily jumps in. We've got the rook getting ready on the h-file. This bishop can slide to d3. So in fact, there's an incredible amount of attackers, and they can get in position very quickly. How many defenders? This bishop can't really defend. Queen and rook can't really defend. So that really just leaves knight and bishop right now that can easily get into the defense. And so we got 5 versus 2. So this would mean in a pure race, white is doing extremely well against the black king. And it's kind of similar. Is how many? Let's do the reverse. Let's look at the white king. So we got the queen. That's more or less aiming here. That's good. We can imagine this rook either here or sliding over. Though it's going to cost at least 2 tempi. Well, it's actually going to take quite a few tempi, actually, because we have to open the c file still. So it's going to be 1, 2. It's going to be 3 tempi just to bring 2 pieces into the attack. This knight, it might be able to come in. It's not completely obvious. And if the knight comes in, that's 1 less defender. Versus, look at this position. These 3 pieces, they can attack. Maybe not so much the rook, but definitely these 2. But they're also nearby to defend. Whereas, if this knight, tries to come in, then that's 1 less defender against the king. Whoops, let's not do that. Similarly, if this bishop ever does a sacrifice over here, then that's 1 less defender against the king. This bishop is really aiming at the wrong side. And so, in a pure race setting, white has more attackers going to the enemy king than black does. And he has more attackers than defenders. And so these are all symptoms of white having a very strong attack. It's also quite a thematic setup that white has, of where the knight comes to g5 with the queen, with the rook on the h-file, all zeroing on one specific square. Very easy to see. This is quite common, very thematic. Whereas black's attack, it's not even clear what a perfect combination of pieces would look like. Like if black could do 2 or 3 moves in a row, there isn't that clear weakness. There isn't, certainly nowhere near as thematic. And then the last thing I want to just cover is that white has the center. This means if there's ever something knight f6, it can always be pushed back. Or as we saw, white could play d5 and push it back. Or open things up and just do very well. And so it's this type of position that we want to look at, and we need to recognize the latent energy, the latent power in there, and we have to think about bailing out. And so maybe that means even though we're in a position where it's opposite side castling and we know we should be attacking, white just has such a large advantage, we actually shouldn't be attacking. And we need to think about maybe trying to bail out with things like c6, keeping things closed a little bit, even though white's attack is still so strong. That actually leads to here, which appears to be the, let's just call it the decisive mistake. That might be an exaggeration, but that's okay. Where, again, white castles, and black spends a tempi playing queen to c8. And then he plays c5, and then eventually it's queen to c7. A lot of tempi right there, in a race situation, where, again, we just noticed that white had all the advantages, all those trumps. So queen to c8 is certainly a mistake. Even though, again, it makes a lot of sense with the rook eyeing the queen. If we play something like c5, is this going to be a problem? This is where, again, the pure calculation, I guess, essentially needs to come in. Is that, yeah, c5, it looks like not the move you want to do, but you need to calculate. And it kind of works. It actually does work. We can imagine that if he takes, we can take either, you can take with the bishop, you can take with the b-pawn, you can even take with nothing. You could imagine something like this, where after take, well look, now we've got an a-file. We got the c-file. All of a sudden, for the cost of a pawn, black has quite a bit. And white does not. He doesn't have the h-pawn, doesn't have knight g5 coming. This is certainly much more unclear. Just by adding in a few moves like that, is how fast a situation can change. Not saying black is better, not saying white is better, but it's certainly very different. And certainly black isn't losing instantly like he is in the game. And this is where the calculation comes in. And this is kind of really important because during most of my videos, especially I essentially aim at more of the beginner intermediate audience. And I talk a lot about general principles, and I speak very generally. That's really how I view chess. And that's great. And up to a certain point, that's going to do very well. And in certain positions, you can just follow the general principles and do very well. And life is great. In other positions, you can't. And the hard part about chess is really, knowing when to calculate. Knowing that, okay, in a position like this, all right, I probably don't want to open up the d file with the rook on there. But if you can calculate, you can do it, and it's okay, then do it. Life is good, and go about it. It's we don't want to be slave to those general principles. We always need to back everything up with calculation. And I am sometimes guilty of not saying this. Mostly because I don't do it very much in my games. Or more accurately, the easy way out is to always play by general principles, but that's not good for your long-term your growth. Like, there are times when you need to calculate, like pretty much this entire game. So that's kind of, if you watch me for any regularity, it's just always keep that in mind. All the good things that I say and some of the crap that I say, I write, I'm not going to pretend to be, I know everything. Just that always, everything needs to be backed up with calculation. That's kind of the takeaway from here. Because that's how some really obvious moves like queen to c8 and then c5 is simply not very good. So I hope you enjoyed that. I hope my little, doom and gloom here at the end doesn't take away from the sheer amazingness of this attack. Again, this is just beautiful. How fast, how strong, how sudden it comes. And let's just look at that final combination one last time. d6, hitting the queen away. Bishop c4. King can barely move. Let's finish it off. Queen. And then that's a nice little rook checkmate at the end. Chess should be beautiful. And I focused a lot on defending, right? But hey, if you can get a position like this where you can control the center, you got thematic attack, and you've got more attackers than defenders, you know what to do. Dig in, find those tactics, win those games. So that's that. I'm going to end it here. SmithyQ, SmithyQ.com. Hope you enjoyed that, or learned from it, or something. That'd be great. Hope everyone's doing okay out there. And that's it. So thanks, everyone. Take care. Bye for now. Oh, shoot. 32 minutes? I gotta learn to, frick.